Hello, welcome to the Week 1 lecture recording for EMS207 2025 30 session. My name is Dr. James Dean and I will be guiding you through some of the content in EMS207 with these weekly lectures. They'll be released usually the Friday the week before, so you should be looking at this one just before the start of the semester. These should be watched before tutorials, so this can be difficult if you have Monday tutorials, but we want to be able to apply the information from these lectures in the tutorial activities. So let's move on now. So there's a few things on the agenda for this particular introductory lecture. I'll be presenting an argument for science and technology education, why those are important areas of study, the long-term ramifications for your students, both as citizens and as future workers as well. I'll be giving you an overview of the EMS207 subject because you do need a good sense of where it's headed and how this is going to operate on a week-to-week basis so that you can get the most out of your learning. What I will say is if you're intending to show up in week 3 or 4 just to see what this is about, don't. Please come in week 1, commit yourself to the subject. You'll be more successful and less stressed, most importantly, as you lead into the submission of assessments. We'll look at the aims of science and technology in education in K-6 settings as well, because we need you to have a bit of a schema or a frame of reference for what you're trying to achieve broadly teaching science and technology in the primary space. And it is not just about imparting wisdom to your students, it's developing dispositions and skill sets as well. We'll talk a little bit about your science and technology background as well. And there are probably some things we can guess about this from the history of the subject and the research itself, but we do want to understand where you're coming from as learners, what you're bringing to the subject, and how we can best work with you. And we'll learn that on each campus through the tutorials as we progress as well. We'll also talk about some preparation for this week. There are usually lots of preparation tasks for you to consider. Typically, though, the lecture and the tutorials are the core elements, and there are other elements that you can build upon as well. Try to engage regularly with your subject coordinator or tutor to keep on top of things, negotiate and do some of those sorts of things as well. Ultimately, all you're graded on, of course, are the assessment tasks. So that's the key focus, and everything is built towards those assessment tasks in this subject. It's all backward mapped. So let's get into it. This hasn't been recorded yet at currently, so there is an outline of the Brightspace website. You should be able to view that by the time you're seeing this. It will take you through how everything's used on the site. I'm still coming to grips with Brightspace myself. This is actually my first semester using it, so if you spot anything that's not quite right or doesn't make sense, contact myself or your subject coordinator to clarify it, or hopefully we can fix it as well. So why should you care about science? That's a fair question, and if you're studying curriculum subjects, you're probably getting quite a large number of lecturers making similar claims as to why PDHPE, English, mathematics, creative arts, why these things are important. And to be fair, I'm primary trained myself. I do think they're all important, and I have a difficult time picking just one, but I've obviously dedicated my time and my career to science. And I'll present this argument. So, it's easy to hide from science. It's easy to hide from everything but English and mathematics in a sense. As a primary teacher, you're responsible for many curriculum areas. This can vary from school context to school context. RFF teachers and specialists can take elements. You've got the STEM question that can come in as well. That is a combination of science, technology, engineering and mathematics in a project or problem-based scenario typically. And of course, you've got extracurriculars, parent engagements, professional development, and just a whole mess of elements tied together here. Understandably, through things like NAPLAN and community priorities, English and mathematics will take up the bulk of your time. Typically those morning and mid sessions. And then, of course, you've got HSCE comprising history, geography, and humanities and social sciences broadly, science, PDHPE, and creative arts. So all of these have importance, and they can be integrated, which is something we'll discuss as well in later weeks. The first thing I would argue is that scientific knowledge and scientific skills reflect the modern world, and they're becoming increasingly important in terms of how we engage in a democratic society and how we participate in those societies economically as well. So, over the past 50 years, the needs of society and the requirements of education have actually changed quite dramatically. This has been driven by globalisation. So the nature of the workforce is typically global, and so the requirements to participate meaningfully have naturally grown and become more complex with time. And of course, there have been huge technological and cultural changes that have accompanied this. I often think about just 2 generations ago. My grandfather, who died many years ago, worked on the railway lines. And it was a pretty secure job, a pretty consistent job, certainly not academic, but not unskilled by any stretch of the imagination, compared to what I'm required to do now. Communicate complex ideas, analyse scenarios, think in a non-linear way. And this idea of complex problem solving in our working worlds is something that's echoed across most professions, if I'm being quite honest as well. So as a result, rapid technological advancement and globalisation have left many jobs obsolete. And this isn't to say that it is blue collar or white collar, physical work or non-physical work. It is repetitive work that is becoming more obsolete. I mean, AI is a spanner in the works here as well. I mean, who knows? At some point, if we find that my job can be done, or lecturer's job can be done by AI, then the student's job can probably be done by AI, and then we're all out of luck, but we'll see how this all pans out. But the net effect of this is base cognitive and literacy requirements to participate in the workforce and have all the associated security and benefits of that have increased. I mean, that's just the state of affairs. So there's really good analysis of this, and I haven't really gone and looked at this more closely. So this is now nearly 20 years out of date, but it provides the bigger picture for this. Essentially, Levy and Manane used workforce data from the US to look at trends from a 30-year period. And we can only assume, I think quite reasonably, that this is only extended. But what they did was actually analyse workforce in terms of the skills represented, the core skills represented in those jobs. So we had here expert thinking, which is problem solving with no rule-based solutions. I would argue education is a part of this. We can see medical doctors, mechanical repairs, mechanics are part of this as well, computer technicians. So it's a wide variety of elements here as well. Complex communication is another one, which is interacting with humans to explain information to affect outcomes. So salespeople, educators, engineers, anywhere where you're required to communicate in a complex way to achieve different outcomes. It says here it's not a threat to ICT. ICT can do some of this now, but it's still in its nascency in some respects. It's not fully interactive. You can try. If you can find an AI that does my job as good as me or better, I guess I'm out of luck. And of course, the other one that is not threatened by IT or ICT are non-routine manual tasks. So janitors still required, designing and creating jewellery. While there have been moves in things like truck driving, there are still difficulties. So driving vehicles is still high risk. Yes, a lot of it is routine, but how does the technology respond to challenges and things like that? So really, what is becoming threatened? And the work that our students and your students will have less access to are routine cognitive or manual tasks. So accounting's threatened. My grandfather was an accountant. Glad I didn't follow that path. Insurance application evaluation is another one as well, typically required to be done by a person. Now, as we found out, particularly out of the US, a lot of this is now done by AI and following fixed frameworks. So white-collar jobs are threatened. And of course, routine manual tasks are threatened as well. So if we think back to Detroit in the US, in Michigan in the US in the 1950s, the golden era, where there were high-paying union jobs, they got replaced by assembly lines, automated assembly lines, things like packaging as well. We can see this in places like Woolworths and Coles, where we're seeing fewer people working the checkout and more automated checkouts, which bothers me tremendously. I don't like it, but that's the way it is. So what does this mean for us? Whether you like it or not, it's coming. So our job, I guess, in this space is to determine what we do for our students to prepare them for the world that they are to enter. And we can actually see these changes. So we can see that the two growth areas in the economy in the US, and this is likely further strengthened over time, is complex communication and expert thinking. So what is going on in your brain and what goes through your mouth are the two areas that continue to grow. Things like manufacturing are declining. This doesn't meet tradespeople, I would argue, are complex communicators and expert thinkers as well. So it's not white collar, blue collar, it's problem solving. It's applying skills in a non-rule based fashion. It is producing ideas where there were none before, not just following rules. Fortunately for us, science, technology, mathematics, these particular disciplines reflect expert thinking and complex communication. So we are doing our students a tremendous service if we can give them a high quality science education, not to become scientists themselves, but to be scientifically literate and have the problem solving and higher order thinking skills that are associated with that form of education. Because those skills don't just apply to science, they apply to a myriad of life areas and professions as well. Sports teams, hobby making, engineering sort of stuff. It's all relevant to this. So if I've swayed you to the importance of scientific literacy or science education, and I hope I've begun to do that in my own clumsy way here, the second question is, of course, how are we going in this space? And it's complicated. Probably could be the shorthand for everything in the subject. It's complicated. But there are two major assessments that can give us a large snapshot here of how Australia is travelling. The Transit International Mathematics and Science Study occurs every sort of 4 years or thereabouts. I think it might have been one of them was disrupted by COVID, and the program for international student assessment gives us insights every 3 or 4 years as well. PISA target gives us information on secondary science. TIMS gives us information on primary and secondary science and mathematics. So it gives us a sense of Australia's performance on a global level. And these aren't just numbers. They give us a sense of what those numbers actually mean, what they tell us about our average students in Australia. So let's have a look. So the table below gives us an insight into really the last, 30 years? 30 years of performance, Australia's performance for Year 4 Transit International Mathematics and Science Study. Australia has actually rebounded quite significantly after a period of stagnation for nearly 25 years. So there's a lot of doom and gloom. And certainly Australia's 1995 score of 560 remained the gold standard. And for a period of time, Australia was sort of middling around these sort of, 520s, 510s, those sorts of things. And, our world ranking was still comfortably outside the top 10, and then bottoming out at 25th in 2015. But something really remarkable happened. It was released last year where Australia somehow shot up during COVID. Shot up tremendously to reach the high international threshold, which I found very, very exciting as a primary science, pre-service primary science teacher educator. So what this suggested to me is, over the years I've been doing this and the years other academics have been doing this and pre-service teachers have been coming through and going into the profession, that they've been doing a better job than those who came before them. I have no evidence for that claim, but the evidence speaks for itself in terms of the quality, with Australia actually going up to 7th internationally during the COVID era. And that's quite remarkable because most countries during that time period experienced a decline. Australia, through quality education and probably per capita wealth, seemed to increase. Now, what does that 550 mean? It's pretty abstract, it's just a number. I'm pretty excited by it. Why should you be excited by it too? Well, here are what the thresholds actually mean in the Transit International Mathematics and Science Study. So at the low level, if you had a student who performed at 400, they would have a loose assortment of science facts. Just recall ability, no fluidity, no ability to apply that, no skill translation necessarily. At the intermediate level, which Australia was always comfortably above, I might add, and many of our students are still at this, they show and apply knowledge of some scientific concepts, which is fair enough. Lots of students have gaps. You'll probably have gaps in your knowledge as well. I certainly do as well. I'm trained as a primary teacher. I'm not a scientist by trade myself. But at the next level, and you'll probably understand closer towards the end of the semester why this is important, at the high level they engage in some scientific inquiry practices, which reflects that idea of expert thinking and complex communication that I talked about earlier. This suggests that students are engaging in the scientific process on average. This is a huge win. And it's sadly not reported enough in the media. Just a tremendous result, and barely any coverage when that came out last year. I was at my son's school, and I mentioned it to a few teachers in passing, and they hadn't heard about it. And I was probably more excited than anyone really. But what this means is you are not here now to fix a terrible system of education. There is evidence of positive things happening through years and years worth of efforts, of which I have made some very small contribution, and I'm hoping you, listening right now, will continue to contribute to these positive trends, or make your own contribution to these positive trends when you go out there as well. So there's some positive things happening, and I hope you can become a part of this. There hasn't been anything new with PISA, but there is a lot of stagnation here. In secondary schools. Now, there may be structural issues with that. Science is separated from the rest of the curriculum. We can discuss those in tutorials if you want, but we have some unique opportunities in primary science because we can integrate. We are one teacher. We can move around and have a little bit more flexibility in how the curriculum areas are delivered. Not always, but we do have more flexibility inherently by design. So what often happens is things tend to drop off after primary school. Notably, there's actually been in the second last era of Year 4 science, we actually saw a closing of the gap between regional and non-regional areas, so metropolitan and non-metropolitan areas. So we've seen some really positive trends in primary science over the last 5 or 6 years. So what does this mean for you as a primary teacher or a future primary teacher? Your job is to improve the scientific literacy of your students. That is the ability to take scientific knowledge and apply it in a context beyond the classroom. To engage with it, to think about it, to read about it, to be a scientifically literate citizen, to interpret information about topical issues like vaccinations or the climate or things like that. So being an informed citizen. It's not about turning your students into scientists. If that happens, that's a fantastic outcome, but our goal is a baseline skill set, and it is not simply knowing current facts. That is never sufficient because they change. They are subject to falsification. So we want students who can seek and evaluate information rather than just a recall of straight facts. Now, I hope you find this a liberating idea. I hope you've come across it at different points in your degree already. But what this means, and I think should be some comfort, it was for me when I came across this myself when I was in your position, is that you don't have to be perfect. You can learn alongside your students. I don't know is an acceptable answer and a starting point for potential discovery. And I find that incredibly liberating. And you'll see if you're in Bathurst, that's generally how I approach things in the tertiary level as well. So to this end, what are the outcomes that you will be assessed against in this subject through the 2 assessment tasks? First one is to be able to interpret the Science and Technology K-6 curriculum and outcome documents for either New South Wales or the Australian curriculum. We will be going through this repeatedly. It appears in every single assessment task, both assessment tasks I should say. Become familiar with it, download a copy of it. We'll be going through this in the next lecture actually. So everything is going in service of the syllabus. That is our guiding star. That is how we determine the value of different technologies, different lesson learning opportunities, and those sorts of things. We're taking a backward mapping approach. We are not just selecting things that seem a bit fun or interesting. We are, as professionals, delivering and making decisions about the delivery of the syllabus. You'll be able to design and produce a digital resource and explain how it will facilitate the learning of science and technology in the primary space. The important thing here is the word facilitate. You are not creating a video that they can click on. And I get the irony, that's what I'm doing right now. It is about enabling student-centered learning, constructivist learning, which we will talk about over the weeks as well. You'll be given and supported to develop all of these skills by coming to the tutorials. Come to class, at the minimum. Ideally listen to the lectures as well, but come to class. If anyone fails the subject, typically we've never seen them before. That's usually how this works. You'll be able to identify opportunities to embed literacy, digital literacy, and numeracy in your teaching. So we're taking advantage of that primary context by bringing in other areas of learning, cross-curricular integration, looking at curricular priorities and other KLAs as well. You'll also be using a range of assessment because it's not sufficient to just guess that things have worked. Diagnostic, formative, summative, all the purposes. pre-assessment, during and after. Different forms of data serving different purposes and creating a professional environment for you, and one where you can make data-informed decisions as an educator. And we'll begin that journey, if you haven't done so already, in this subject. You'll be able to apply different models of pedagogy. We've got some core ones here. There are some different ones, but these are the key framework. Ideally will be the 5 E's framework, which is a form of inquiry. Some of you will explore project-based learning. There will be a lecture on that as well. I believe it's week 3. I think it is. And of course, you'll develop a detailed teaching program. Part of this will be through a group component, which you will then, as an individual, fully develop 3 lesson plans as well. And they'll be going through really the skills of working scientifically and design and production. So you will have the content of science and the processes whereby the content is worked through, which are working scientifically and design and production. So there is the prescribed text. Good news for you, it's free. It's the syllabus. That's it. Click on it, download it, save a copy to your tablet or whatever it is, it's PDF form. Become familiar with it. If you're not so, or if you don't, we'll be going through it in tutorials repeatedly. Where we have issues early on is students simply refusing to engage with the document. And we will give you the shortcuts through it, what things mean, because you will need to become very proficient in interrogating syllabus documents as a teacher. There are a series of recommended readings, and these are similar to some of the early science subjects you may have engaged with. Probably not this cohort, but future ones certainly will. These are the Scamp and Prestons. There's a more recent Teaching Primary Science Constructively as well. Any will do. They give really good background information on things like alternative conceptions. They incorporate the 5 E's framework, and they give ideas about teaching approaches. So have a look at those. We have quite a number of licenses available. They can be a good source as well to bring in scholarly material into your assessment tasks. You can do this individually, or you might break this up in your groups, which you'll be engaging with in tutorials in the first half of the semester. So let's get down to business. This is usually the thing pretty much everyone cares about. So thank you for indulging me in the earlier material. Let's talk about the assessment. So assessment 1, part A and part B are due at the same time, the 27th of April, 2025. Part A is developing a unit outline that consists of approximately 6 to 12 learning experiences or lessons. Okay, it's a broad overview. And the goal of the group is to create lessons that sequence together to address the syllabus outcomes that have been assigned or selected by you. We'll deal with this in tutorials, but you'll be working ideally in groups of 4. So the size of the unit outline will depend on the number in the group. So if it's a pair, if it's 2 people, 3 lesson plans each or learning experiences each. So 6 for a group of 2, 12 for a group of 4, 9 for a group of 3. We don't like going into groups of 5 or 6. It makes it very cumbersome and very challenging to work together. So we'll try and manage that in the first part of the first week of tutorials. That's the goal. Now, you've probably had an initial visceral reaction to this, which is, oh no, group work, I don't like group work, I'll do all the work, and I don't want to do all the work, but please don't stress. The history of this dates back nearly 20 years, so we have a very refined system. It's reflected in how it's marked, it's reflected in how it's structured in the tutorials. So I can assure you that most of the key concerns you may have will be addressed directly in the subject. So the group work component is being designed so that you can experience what it is like to collaborate with other teachers. It is a project-based scenario to turn our tutorial rooms into staff rooms. That's the idea. We're flipping things around in this, and we want you in the tutorials working in groups to do your assessment tasks, to design your units, to design your lesson plans, to create resources, to try things out. So you'll be given guidance and support by your tutors. The group work is weighted at just 15%. And we, as the markers, as the tutors and the coordinators, reserve the right to adjust the marks if people perform well above or well below the standard of the group. And if someone drops out of the group and doesn't submit their part, that will not be considered in the marking. And that is reflected in the rubric. There is no number of lessons required. It is a bit like an accordion. It can be stretched depending on the circumstances, okay? The minimum requirements for group work can be met by attending tutorials or another form of contact. So if you become sick, email, Facebook message, I don't know what the young people are doing these days, TikTok each other, whatever it is. But my advice would be to come to class, do some work in class. If you want to meet outside of class because you're aiming for that high distinction, you can absolutely do that, but it is not mandatory and you cannot make other people do it. Coming to class will be the minimum expectations. If you can't come to class for a given week, you must check in with your group and complete tasks. If you disengage from your group, you will be removed from it. But incorporating the perspectives of others will enhance the quality of your work and the group's work. So you'll have the perspectives of your tutors, you'll get reports from other groups, you'll get advice. It will be a very messy and busy environment, a very productive environment, a full-on environment. Part B is due at the same time. Everyone submits the unit outline, so just copy and paste across. So everyone must submit it in Brightspace. And then you've got the second component, which are your 3 lesson plans. So you take 3 of your lesson plans that you've briefly outlined in the unit outline and you turn them into 3 fully fleshed out lesson plans with resources and key materials. So you'll work on those individually and you'll be marked on them individually, the 3 lessons that are deeply done. So you'll describe the role of the students. You'll also describe your role as the teacher. What questions you're asking, when you're doing things, how you organise the class, those sorts of things. Because you're not just going to sit there reading your paper. You're not my high school history teacher. You won't be doing that. We'll also including teacher background information as part of this as well. You'll be mapping to the 5E's instructional model or an approved constructors approach. If you want to go with a different approach, you've got to talk to us first. A rule that I think is the safest thing to live by here is no surprises for your marker. Don't surprise us. Just don't do that. Identify instructional and cooperative learning strategies and apply them through the lesson plan. You'll need to map different forms of assessment. The level of detail and quality will correspond to your mark, and we will talk about that because the rubric's pretty clear. And you'll need to link to relevant science and technology and cross-curricular outcomes as well. And how extensive and detailed that is will again inform your mark. You've got a final assessment task here, and I should also mention for this, because it is a group assessment, the auto extension is not available for assessment 1. It is available for assessment 2 if you'd like to use it. Assessment 2 is due on the 30th of May. It is an individual assignment, and you will design and produce a digital learning resource to facilitate learning of science concepts and or skills, usually around the 5E's. Typically it is based upon a component of your first assessment task, but you can change. So there's flexibility in this. You'll also write a 2-page report and no more. That's 2 pages excluding references, that explains how and why you would use this resource with reference to academic literature. So I really like this assignment. It's a lot of fun to mark. It's a lot of fun for people to produce. People make videos. They decide how they'll facilitate investigations and student-centered tasks. So when we think about a digital learning resource, they're not sitting there passively engaging with it. They can move away from it. They can take screenshots. They can feed information into it. They can move around and go outside. It's up to you. They're not stuck with it though. So it's meant to facilitate and enhance student-centered learning. What is science and technology? Well, we've got some videos here if you'd like to look at them. But essentially science is the search, the creation, the development of human knowledge through the scientific investigative process. It is quite broad. You can have open investigations, more naturalist ones. But once we determine that, investigate that, create that body of knowledge, and usually it must be falsifiable, technology is the application of that knowledge. It is not always digital technology. Anything that is created by humans for an intended purpose is technology. So we take the broad view in this subject. Please watch the videos if you have the time or the interest. But if we look quickly at the aim of science and technology in the K-6 syllabus, important to look at, because it's not just about whether you think I'm right or whether the videos are right. It's not about becoming me or your tutor. It's about doing what the syllabus requires of you and making professional decisions that this course should be preparing you to make. So this is the study of science and technology enables students to explore scientific and technological concepts and develop knowledge and understanding of the world. So this is material world. So material world, physical world. So you sort of things like physics, living world, earth and space. Sort of the classics: astronomy, geology, physics. What's the other one? Chemistry would be the other one. And I mentioned astronomy. Through the application of working scientifically, design and production skills. So the science disciplines taught through scientific inquiry and the design and production skills. So the application of working scientifically in design and production tell us how to teach. The others typically teach us what to teach. They are married together, they are not separate. So the goal of scientific education, in my view, although this is contested, I've written a bit about this myself, is to develop scientifically and technologically literate students. So it is not simply having the process skills necessary to open up a browser and search for things. It is about problem solving, engaging in extended inquiry, and it is about creative and critical thinking and how we engage with this. So often the way to interrogate whether what you're doing is towards this end is to look at the verb. What is it the students are doing at this point in time? And am I advancing them to a higher level of cognition? But we've got models for that as well. But in terms of what this person, this theoretical scientific literate person may be able to do, and it's not work for the CSIRO, although it could be, is to be able to identify questions, investigate and draw evidence-based conclusions. This can be first-hand, it can be through extended reading, it can be through second-hand research. They are sceptical and questioning of claims made by others about scientific matters. So they are not susceptible to pseudoscience. Doesn't mean they always get it right. We all make the wrong decisions sometimes, but they have an internal framework for making evaluative decisions. Make informed decisions about the environment and their own health. And again, this is hugely important for all of us because our health impacts others. Interested and understand the world around them, and engage in the discourse of and about science. So they are capable of engaging with these topics as they emerge through the media, through different forums, as part of being a citizen. Technologically literate people have similar skills. So they have a broad understanding of how and why things work. They can critically evaluate technological developments and trends. And look, I'm hoping this semester that we can get, I've got a colleague who does some great work with AI in education, and I think there's some wonderful opportunities for us to discuss what the upsides, the limits, where we should stop, what the line is with regards to AI and how you learn at university and how you should teach with it and how it can support you as a future teacher. Understand how our technological products and systems are developed, and of course can design and evaluate their own responses, their own solutions in response to needs and opportunities. So AI can be part of this. Spreadsheets can be part of this. I mean, my life as an online lecturer is testament to this notion as well. So I've talked a lot here. Obviously, you can't talk back because it's a lecture. But let's have these questions will be taken into your tutorials a little bit. We do want to reflect on these, so I'd just like to plant the seeds of these. You might jot down some notes. You think about them if you'd like. But how do you feel about science? And be brutally honest. You may hate it. You must be honest with us because we can only teach you if we know where you're coming from. Did you enjoy science in school? Yes or no? Me personally, I took senior science. I wanted to do history. I kind of like science. I preferred history at the time. I didn't mind it. It was fine. Got to do some practical elements, but my life had other things going on, namely basketball, which probably wasn't a particularly good use of time, but that's what happened. How do you feel about technology? Me, I love it. I love it a lot, but there are limits. I'm certainly not a social media person, for example. I've never fully understood it. I don't like being out there. I feel exposed on social media, so I don't engage with it. But there's a lot of value in social media too that I can see as an outsider. That's just my example. How do you feel about it? And do you feel confident using digital technologies? Me? Generally, yes. I can look things up. I do it a lot. And most importantly, most of the technologies I know did not come from my teacher training, my initial teacher education, or my high school experience. So what I'm showing you now is probably not going to be relevant in 3 or 4 years, but hopefully you'll have a skill set necessary to interrogate these changes as they occur in your career. Have you observed science and technology in a prac placement? Years ago I asked. About 70% said no, I have not seen it, which was concerning. I'm hoping that's less common now. And how do you feel about teaching science and technology in a K-6 setting? I mean, given you haven't been taught about it, you might not be confident. Fair enough. But let's have these thoughts now and think about them. So how will you teach science ideally in a K-6 setting? Well, let's just get some keywords on the page and we'll tease these out as things develop over the course of the tutorials in the next 3 months, the first semester here. Lots of these words will become familiar with you. Some of them will become quite special to you. And that's a really fun thing about this subject. People find elements of these and they really take them on and make them their own. Makes it a very exciting subject, and that's why the rubric's written with lots of example points, because we like you to take the ideas that resonate with you. It's going to be inquiry based. We're moving with students to answer questions, to discover solutions. We might be having them do projects that relate to a natural area, a natural issue or something. Water testing, for example. Engaging with counsel, cooperative learning. It can be discovery based, and the truth is you usually know what the discovery will be, but they are working through that process. Hey, guess what? Transmission's part of this as well. You will at times explain things to students, model things to students, reword things, engage in joint construction. So yes, you will be transmitting knowledge to them about the content, about the expectations, reinforcing the skills. It is not about student-centered versus teacher-centered. It is about how these are sequenced to get students achieving the outcomes. But you can't stick with transmissive. Transmissive does not move students into higher order thinking, but it is a part of your repertoire, just like worksheets are, to be quite honest. Cultural historical approaches. So, really incorporating the backgrounds and traits of the students that you will have. Now, we can't do this in a subject. You don't have a class, but we can become familiar with those principles. Constructivism. The notion that knowledge does not exist absent the mind of a thinking human being. So you can have Piaget's internal constructivist idea, which is that we internally construct knowledge based upon previous experiences. We link it to things we already know. We create patterns and pathways or schemas based on our knowledge. How you would explain these ideas is different to how I would explain these ideas. And when we engage in Vygotski's social constructivism, we learn even more. So when we talk to each other, explain to each other, test things together, knowledge tends to develop better and more effectively. And there is just a slew of research to support this. I've conducted some of it, and we'll engage with that in the upcoming weeks. I've got a whole literature review on this. If you don't believe me, check in later. The conceptual change model, which is, of course, the notion that students start off with beliefs and ideas, and we don't tell them they're wrong. We move them along by engaging in experiences that help them to see the limits of their current understanding. It's not about judgment. Problem-based learning. Hey, there's a problem here. How do we solve it? Very authentic stuff. One of my favourites. The interactive approach. Guided discovery, which is usually just having scaffolds and support in place, as opposed to open discovery, which is just figure it out yourself. The 5 E's and general investigative approaches. These overlap. They're a bit messy, but I think you'll, as a teacher, find these very enjoyable ways to teach. For me, it's the messiness of it. It turns the classroom into controlled chaos where the students are doing a lot of talking and thinking, but they require a lot of preparation to work before class. So I like to think, if you engage in transmission, you'll be doing most of your work in class. If you engage in these things, you'll be doing most of your work before class, and you'll be enjoying your in-class time more, in my experience. A core concept we're going to think about, and we're going to come back to over the weeks, is this idea of pedagogical content knowledge. So we have your pedagogical repertoire, the teaching strategies that you are aware of with varying degrees of effectiveness, varying degrees of comfort, transmission all the way through to discovery learning. You'll have heaps of them in this subject. Cooperative learning strategies and your knowledge about the content, knowledge of what to teach. You've done some discipline subjects before in the first year likely. When these start to, the overlap between them is PCK, pedagogical content knowledge. So this is the teachable space. This is where you can actually educate other people. And you're probably familiar with people that have all sorts of content knowledge and no teaching knowledge. And they just end up talking at you. Those old school maths teachers that would just lecture and lecture and lecture. So our job is to grow both these circles and enhance the overlap between them. When you get into these spaces, you end up, when you try a strategy in a content to deliver content in a classroom and actually get that real world experience, which is where you go in your pracs, you end up with a professional and pedagogical and professional experience repertoire. So when you try some of these things that we talk about in this subject, and you realise, that bit doesn't quite work, this bit works, I should change that. And it becomes real, and you try it and you get feedback from teachers, you end up with that repertoire, that established pedagogical and professional experience repertoire. Another element to this is one of my favourites, is how you end up with content representations, which are your analogies, similes, models, things that help people to understand a new concept by referencing a known or previously known idea. Something like gravity is a bit like a slinky, that sort of thing, that it seems to stretch, the idea of a spring, coil spring. Or the transfer of energy in a circuit is a bit like a bicycle chain. It's a bit like, if you find yourself saying that, you're probably using a content representation. Once you start knowing them and seeing them, you might see them in how you engage with teammates at sport or friends in a hobby. You'll see the brilliance of content representations everywhere. What constitutes pedagogical content knowledge? Heaps of stuff. We're not going to sit here and drill you with this. We can't even give you all the answers to this because we don't know where you're teaching and what the shape your career will take. But it's knowledge and beliefs about the purpose of education. That's why we've started where we started in this lecture, I should say, about the purpose of science education. If we just started with the syllabus and you had no underlying sort of idea about scientific literacy and having students take control of their learning and have these skills for life, you wouldn't have that guiding principle. You need knowledge of content as well. We're going to fill in gaps. We're going to see where strong points and weak points may lie. You also need to know about what students think and what they understand. This usually takes the form of diagnostic assessment because they might already know stuff. They might surprise you. They may have bizarre and fascinating ideas, and it's not about them being wrong. It is about using those in the learning, helping them move through, helping them to see their own growth as their ideas and knowledge grows and change. Curricular knowledge, well, we'll be doing that next week. Knowledge of instructional strategies, because the curriculum tells you where to go, and it gives us a good sense of what that should look like, but then you need the instructional strategies to enact that. The curriculum is not a series of lessons. It doesn't tell us the instructional strategies, although it very strongly hints at them. But it doesn't tell you how to get to that problem-based learning scenario. It doesn't tell you where the worksheets come in, where the transmission comes in, where you move away from something and try something else. You need knowledge of context. Teaching in the regions, different to the cities. Different socio-cultural groups, private versus public. These must impact your teaching. And relatedly, you need to have a knowledge of the wider socio-political context within which you are operating. You want to respect the community, but you want to be accurate and honest in what you're teaching as well. And that's a fine line. And I hope we get to discuss this in tutorials actually, because it's a really fascinating profession. But anyway, if you've gotten this far, thank you. You've listened to me rabbit on long enough. But let's look at the weekly preparation. So these are for the first week tutorials. Read the subject outline and familiarise yourself with the assessment tasks. Start with this. If you can get a grasp on the assessment tasks, start thinking about them, have a draft document that's just got the heading in it, you will feel much more comfortable over the coming weeks. Start now, thank yourself later. Attend the tutorial so that the cooperative learning groups or stage teams can be formed. If you know someone, you can organise, and you can't be there, you can organise with your tutor or a friend or in your tutorial group to be a part of a team. But this has to happen by next week at the very latest, week 2 at the very latest, because we're going to start immediately in week 1 in the tutorials on these tasks. And if you come in week 3, you'll just be left doing it by yourself. There's no inherent disadvantage in that. You can certainly still do it by yourself to some level or another, but it will make it very difficult to function in the tutorials because the tutorials are based around group work. We've got a couple of sections from Module 1 for you to look at. 1.1, Developing the Correct Attitude, the Australian Curriculum and General Capabilities. They're quite short. You can check those out if you find my lectures to be a bit meandering and confusing. And of course, bring laptops, tablets, some form of technology to class, because we're going to do set up shared spaces, do a bit of research stuff, and it will help you download the materials that you would need. But anyway, that's it for the week 1 lecture. I hope you enjoy your first week of tutorials. I hope you find them engaging, and I hope to see your view count come in for the week 2 tutorials next week, lectures next week.